All right, we're back. It's COMP305, week 4, lesson 4, part 5 of our male pilot build. We just did scoring in our last video. Let's do one more thing for the score before we end this scoring piece off. I'm going to click on my game over label just to check it out, and I want to make a simple change to it. I want to change my font to use the font that I already have in my game. I have a font asset called Doc51 that I included for you in the game. I want to realign the font, so instead of it being Arial, it's Doc51. There's two ways to change that. I can drag and drop, or I can click this little target here, right, and choose Doc51 as my target. Now this is what it does. It kind of makes it so it's a nicer font, much nicer than a boring one, right? Now there's some adjustments sometimes we have to make, just FYI. Like for example, our score, right? Right now I've only given it a width of 400. I may need to adjust this a little bit, right? Because my score might be bigger, hopefully. So let's change that. Score definitely has to be bigger than that, right? Because I won't have enough room for my score anymore. And let's make it so that my score label, just by chance, it doesn't matter, is like this, the width of my screen, like 600. And so it's pretty long. If you notice, it's like it takes up most of my screen width. Game over won't have to be that way. My lives label, if I click on my lives label and do the same thing, so I changed my lives label to this Doc51. I'm going to change my length of my lives label now again. And right now it's, and if I zoom in just to show you, oops, undo. If I zoom into my lives label, you can see that it's pretty good. It's going to hold the bounding box is like this big, so it's pretty good right now to hold my lives. That's okay. But if it's a nicer, grittier looking font, as an example, than my boring font that I used before, let's go over here to my score, right? I'm going to click on my score. Now this is where we have to make some adjustments. I'm going to click on this just to show you. And if I change my font from my score again to Doc51, right? Pull this off a little bit to the side, you notice that it's slightly, I need more space, right? And that means I have to adjust my location from the actual font itself, just a tad, right? And make it bigger, because 200 might not be enough. Let's make it 250. How about 300? That's probably about right. And the reason why I'm saying this is because you're going to need more space, because this font is different sized than our Arial font, right? Okay, cool. So I've got that. And this is a good chance to check it out. Let's save the scene and start the game. Let's see how this looks. Now it looks a little better, huh? Okay. So it looks a little nicer. It's kind of a custom font, right? Make the game a little bit more enhanced looking. Okay.
Yay.
Right? I got a pretty good score there. Got a problem with my game. And I'm done, right? Now, I don't have a game over. I could definitely put a game over sound, like for example, you know, one of those, right? I can totally do that. I can play that sound because it's just an audio source, right? That I can add in, right? And there's some really cool audio resources that we can use to do that. If I don't have something like that, I want to make an audio source off the cuff. Does anyone have an idea of what I can do? No? Let me go to concept board for a second, see if anyone's got any ideas on concept board or any questions. Hey, I got no questions. I got a couple of stickies, but nothing. That's fine. Let's go into, so there's Audacity is a really neat little tool. I'll show you what it looks like. It's a free download, actually. I can actually find it in my, probably here. Audacity. I can launch Audacity. It's a tool that's cross-platform, right? Here it is, right? And if you want to find this tool online, let's go to Audacity. I was going to search for Audacity. You can make your own sounds if you want to, right? I want to make a silly sound. I'm going to actually record my voice here. I'm going to go, right? One of those, right? That's the game over, right? Sound. So how do we do that? So you can download Audacity free, right? It's a kind of an open source tool for you guys to use, right? I'm going to go in here and try this by pressing record, right? I'm going to record my voice, so bear with me. Right? Here we go. Right? Oh, it didn't work. Let's try that again. Man, that was a fail. We'll undo that and try it again. Okay, I've got some spaces in here, and what I want to do is hear it, right? So let's try the whole thing out from the beginning. Yeah, it's kind of It's kind of a sucky one, right? And I want to take off this part. I want to kind of cut this part out, right? So you can do that with Audacity. It allows you to kind of cut pieces away, right? So I want to kind of aim at a place that I want to remove my script because there's some pieces here that I want to clean up. And if you notice, if I hover over these things, I can trim my audio. Undo. Trim my audio by getting rid of it. So there's nothing there. I can minimize it, or I can cut it out, right? And I can do the same thing here if I listen to it again. Right? So sorry, I got to set my playhead over here. So I'm going to set my playhead way back here and play. Right, that's all I need, right? It's kind of silly. Right, so now let's just take this part out, and we'll cut that out too. Right, now let's try it. That's all I need. It's kind of silly, right? But I've got this. Now, I want to modify this so it sounds like, you know, I can modify this so it doesn't sound just like me doing that. That's kind of a silly thing to do. So how do I do that? Well, I can highlight this whole script. And again, you can generate different effects. Like I can amplify, I can auto duck, I can change my pitch, I can change my speed. Let's change my pitch, right? So then let's try this out, right? That's the same pitch. But what if I want to change my pitch so it's from a B, right? Or my pitch percent. Let's just lower it a little bit and see what happens now. Right? Let's use that one just for a change. And you can modify and use vibrato and all that kind of stuff. You can add your own beats to it. You can add multiple tracks, you know, whatever. But I want to make some kind of sound, right? And I want to export this now as a sound. How do I do that? I want to kind of go File, Export. I can export my selection too. Let's just export my file. And it tells me MP3 files. I can use it. Now you can, there's a little plugin for this one to change to MP3. Otherwise, it's an OGG file, right? And I'm going to save this thing as kind of my ending sound, right? So this is called ending sound, right? And I'll pop this into my Unity project directly. So I'll go into my Unity projects, and I'll drag it into my COMP305 mail pilot for us, into my assets, into my audio, right? Right in here is an audio asset, MP3 files, save. Let's see what happens. It's going to ask me for some information. I'm going to call it my arcade game. I'm going to change my thing to 2015, right? It's not for my Starbase 12 game, but it's actually for my mail pilot demo, right? Give me a bit of a track thing, and it's going to be my ending sound, right? Here's my end sound, or game over sound, if you will, right? I can add other comments, blah, blah, whatever I want, and then press OK. Then when it does that, it exports it. Let's go back to Unity, right? Let's check our audio. Here's my ending sound. Let's play it out, see what it sounds like here, right? Right? Now I want to play that. I want to play that on game over, right? Now remember, my ending sound, my player, has a couple of audio sources here, right? I want to add that audio source at the end. So I'm going to add it, an audio source, really quickly. Audio source, here it is, right? And let's add a clip to the audio source, which would be my ending sound, right? So here we go. I'm going to kind of put that in there. There's my ending sound. I want it not to play on awake. I don't want it to loop. And it might be pretty long, but you know, at least it's some kind of audio clip that I want to play, right? And I want to play this when my game is over, right? So I'm going to go back into my script now. And if you notice, up here, I've got my access to my audio sources. I don't have to do anything in my script because I've already said that I've got audio sources and my cloud audio source and my island audio sources for this audio sources 2. This one would be audio sources 3, which I don't have yet. And I need some kind of container for that. So I'm going to create that up here. We're going to call this end audio source. Let's call it end audio source, right? And we'll make it an underscore because that's our convention, because it's a private variable. And we'll add this in here. We'll say this dot end audio source is equal to this dot audio sources 3, because the third one that we've got in there, it's enumerated into the next one, right? That's our end audio source. And we're going to play this when we finalize our score and all that stuff. We're going to say this dot end audio source dot play, right? And let's see how that plays out. If we've done everything correctly and we don't have any errors, we play this out now. We've quickly created an end condition. right? Get a score.
Yay.
And now, hey, where's my audio source? How come it doesn't work? Anybody? Anyone have an idea of why this audio source doesn't play? There's a good reason for it.
Is it not because it's not in the end method?
Nope. It's because we've destroyed our bloody player, right? And we've done it before my audio source started to play. So let's check this out. I've destroyed my object. None of the audio source is going to play anymore because the object doesn't exist in our game. And all of this is tied into my player object. So let's go back into my script. You notice I destroy my game object first, right? What I really want to do is I can try and play my end audio play my source here. This is one of the challenges you're going to have when you destroy game objects. I'm supposed to reset them, right? It's because my audio source all gets destroyed when I destroy I'm destroying my object within itself, right? It may not have a chance to play before it's destroyed, by the way. I may want to, play my end audio source somewhere else. That's why I'm telling you, you may want to realign this so that my scoreboard controls my end audio source and has nothing to do with my player, right? As opposed to my player leaving the screen and controlling the audio. So I'm going to leave it like this for you and see what happens one more time. I'm going to save it and play. Okay, let's try and get the score before I die. It didn't work yet, right? It didn't work because my player was destroyed so quickly, right? Now, there's a couple ways we can do that. We can use a coroutine to do it and everything, but my recommendation is you make it part of the scoreboard, and what you can do it, I'm not going to do it here from a time perspective, but the idea from what I'm showing you is you'd make it so that your scoreboard controls this end audio source because it's never going to disappear. Your scoreboard should also control your score, not your player. How do I set up my player to communicate, my collider, to communicate with my scoreboard? It's not difficult. You got to make a reference from your collider script to my scoreboard and then access my objects in my collider. Okay? So I'm going to leave that to you. I'm going to upload that to GitHub. I'm going to say git add dot git commit -m added end audio source. So we understand what that means. And then git push origin master. You'll actually have the files too, which is good. So you can have that little if you really want to, right? And that's one piece. Okay, one more thing. So I've got my Audacity. This is a neat little tool. Highly recommend you learn how to use that. There's some really cool tutorials online. And it's not that, I don't want to save. It's not that difficult to use, as you can see. I mean, you can play around with it. That's part of the fun, right? That's one thing you can do. Now, what about if I want to make my game, I want to make my plane animated? That's one of the things that people ask for all the time. I want to make my propeller animate, right? Because that's the problem that people have, right? So let's go back to I'm going to zoom out here. And I'm going to kind of pan out really quickly. Here's my plane. If you notice, my plane doesn't animate, right? I want to animate my plane now. I want to use some animation, but basically it's going to be a click on my player for a second. Here's my player. I have a couple things I want to notice here. One is my sprite renderer. My sprite renderer right now has just my plane here, right? And my ordering layer is too. But I want to add in, let me just minimize this other stuff that's not important anymore, right? What I want to add here into my player is another script. You might want to do an animator, right? We're not doing that right now. We're going to get to animators later on, right? That's another kind of way of doing it. We're going to make another component. We're going to do kind of the way we do it online when we looked at the if you actually look at the script that comes with the tutorial online, you're going to see how it's done. And there's a couple of things we need to do. All right, so let's try this out. So first, we're going to add a new component. We're making a new script, and we're going to call this, player animator. The player animator script. Okay, we're going to kind of create an ad. Now remember, the script gets added into like no man's land. We want to kind of pull this into our scripts folder. Right, here's our script folder now. And I'm going to double click on the player animator script. Here it is, double click. And if you notice, it just starts off with this. Right? And that's okay, but we need a couple of public instance variables here. And I'll kind of put it up here for you to see. So the first public instance variable, public instance variables. What that I want is public. I want to make a sprite array, just like we saw in the tutorial online, called sprites, right? So it's a sprite array, and it's public. So that's interesting what it does, right? Remember how we did this? This is right from the tutorial. I'm also going to make a floating point object that's also public called frames per second. Frames per second. Okay, cool, cool. I also want to make a private connection, private instance variables here, right? And I want to do private. It's going to be of type sprite renderer. Here's my sprite renderer, which I already have. Remember, I showed you just now, right? And I want to make it a reference to it because our sprite renderer is going to be called sprite renderer. There you go. That's my kind of private reference to my sprite renderer. Okay, cool. Let's assign my sprite renderer now to the actual game object, the game component that's here in my player component. If you look, I have a player component, and inside I have a sprite renderer component as part of my player object, right? So I want to make a reference to that here. So this is just right from the tutorial again. This dot underscore sprite renderer is equal to game object dot get component and in angle brackets sprite renderer, right? So I'm going to make a reference to it like this. And by the way, sometimes what we want to do is also use this as sprite renderer. You might see that also from the because sometimes you run into a little bit of issues. We want to kind of cast this to make sure it's an actual sprite renderer itself. Bear with me. Sometimes you need it, and sometimes you don't. And it makes, from a compatibility perspective, more compatible with version 4. So I've got to make a reference here, right? Okay, here's where it gets funky, right? And to understand what it's doing here. So I want to make, in my update then, every update, right? I want to change my index to the next sprite. That's what I want to go to. So right now we might have one sprite because we only have the one image, right? But I want to go from sprite 1 to sprite 2 to sprite 3 and keep moving into the from one frame to the next, right? I only have one frame that I've added in. We're going to change that in a second. But I want to move my index because there's different sprites, right? From one sprite to the next. And I want to do that every frame somehow. How do I do that? So I'm going to say int index, right, is equal to, and this is where it gets funky, int, we're going to cast this as a time, right? And then time since level load, so you can kind of, that's a kind of a built-in function to time, much like time.delta time is a built-in function, right? And then times frames per second, so this frames per second, right? And just to make it official, this should actually, this is an index that's going to be recreated every frame. This variable is going to be recast every frame, so it's going to wipe out this the value every frame on update, right? And then what I want to do is I want to say, well, okay, that's good, but if I was going to use that, it's a really weird number. It'll keep on increasing forever. I want to say index then is equal to index, right? Right, and I'm going to use the modulus operator to say I want to divide it by sprites.length. So let's do that. This dot sprites dot length, right? My length value minus 1, right? What I'm saying here is I want my index. By the way, you can use percentage equal as well. This equally works as well. If I say instead of this, if I go percentage equals, that's just a shortcut operator for that, right? Is equals to, so I'm taking the, it's like I'm dividing equals. I'm dividing by the length of my sprites, right? And I want the remainder. When my remainder is 0, right? That's when I want to change my index. So, because my frame count is going to keep going up. So I'm counting how many ticks per second. And if I can divide the number of ticks by my frame count, I want to switch frames. That's what I'm doing. I'm switching frames on tick count. Again, this is one way of doing it without using the animator built into Unity, right? Okay, let's do this. This dot sprite in sprite renderer sprite, the actual sprite itself. Let me go back here and show you what I'm looking at. Sprite renderer dot sprite. I'm going to change up my sprite by pointing to this dot sprites index. That's what it's doing, right? So this changes my sprite image. Changes sprite. Right? That's what it does. According to this, flips the sprite from one sprite to the other, and then resets it over and over again, according to how many sprites are in my sprite render. Right now, I don't have any that are in there. Let me go back and show you what I'm talking about. If I go back to my script, right? If I look at my player controller, I can see here that I got frames per second is 0. And if I look at my sprites, I have the size of my array. When I put an array as a public object, right, in my inspector, it automatically counts the size of my array. My array size is 0 right now. So how many planes am I going to see on my screen right now? 0. There's no planes. So how do I add these in? Well, I have these other objects here in my assets. Let's go to my sprites. And if I notice I have these plane sprites, but there's a problem, right? Please do this before you add them in. Notice that my pixels per frame or pixels per unit is 100. I want to change this to 1 and recast this from bilinear to point. Otherwise, my scale will be off. I want to kind of click apply. Do that to plane number 2. Make sure that this is all correct, or else you'll have a weird effect here, right? Point, apply. Plane number 3. Point, apply. I've got them all there. Now that I have these, I can go back to my player object, and here's the trick. I want to drag and drop my plane onto my sprites array, like this. Here's my plane, drag it onto my sprites, wait till I get a plus sign. See that plus sign? Now I can drag it, and I got my first plane. Let's do the next one, plane 2. Here's plane 3. Now I've got 3 planes on my sprite array, but my frames per second is 0. What I need to do is change this to something like 20, or you can play with this number, by the way. And I'm going to save. Now, if I've done everything correctly, first of all, let's check the console. No errors, right? That's a good sign, right? Here's my scene. Let's press play and see what I get. Yay.
Yay.
See the colors working, right?
Yeah.
There we go. My score is over, and hey, there's no man. Pissed me off. How come it stopped playing that noise? Well, because I didn't format it properly. All right, let's do that. So that's one. One more thing. What if? Here's the question that one of our students, Josh, came up with. I don't want to move by mouse movement or keys. I want to use I don't want to use my keys or my arrows. I want to use my mouse movement to do my movement. How do I do that? Well, it's all part of my. First of all, let's save this one as, before we do that, please, git add dot git commit -m. Here's another different change, right? Added plane animator script. That's all I've done. And then git push origin master. So I'm pushing that script up to GitHub. That's important, right? So that change has been recorded on GitHub. So I can always step back, right? And now let's go to the next level. I want to use mouse movement instead of keyboard movement to control my player. And of course, that's going to be inside of my player controller script. Right, here's my player controller script right here. Double click. It comes up. And if you notice down here, this is where I use my input.getAxis to do that. One note about input.getAxis. Where do I get this? One person asked me, where do I get this horizontal and these things? And I talked about it being an enumerator last time. You can see this information here by going to this location. Take a look. If I go to Unity, and if I go to Edit, and if I go to Project Settings, and if I go to Input, right? On the right, it's going to show me an axis that looks like this. You can expand it to show, here's my horizontal axis, and here are the keys that are associated, my left button, my positive right button, my alt negative button, A and D, and my gravity, and there's some other options here. You can see that there's other ones, horizontal, vertical, there's a jump, right, on jump, and everything else. All of them are listed here. You can actually see all of them here, and you would be forgiven to think that I can use my mouse X and mouse Y values to move my mouse around. That's not the way it works. For a couple of reasons. One, when I use my mouse X and mouse Y values, all I'm doing is getting a positive or negative number, right? Just like I would use my arrow keys. That's not what we want. We want it to follow the mouse around. Wherever my plane is, Wherever my mouse is, I want my plane to move there exactly. Now there's a problem. If I don't do it right, if I just use mouse X, what's going to happen is my mouse X coordinates are on my screen. My screen coordinates and my game coordinates are two different sets of coordinates. I've got a global set of coordinates and a local set of coordinates, and they're not meshing right now. So if I was to do something like this, let's try this out. We're going to just kind of put this in stasis here for a second, this whole piece right here, right? So my input is going to be different now than this, right? It's over here. So this right here is going to be, you know, our movement by keyboard, right? Let's make a new one, a new script, new part of the script, which is movement by mouse, right? How do I do that? That's pretty simple. I need to declare a new vector2 object, right? And we're going to say, we're going to call this mouse position, right? And we're going to say is equal to, here we go, input dot mouse position, because that's what we want. Part of the input controller, but it's called mouse position, right? And what I want to do, you'll be forgiven to think that, look at this new position X is equal to input.mouse position X. Let's try that one and see what happens. So we'll say this dot underscore new position dot X, right? The X coordinate, because that's all we care about. We're not going to move the Y coordinate, it's going to stay static, right? Our plane's still going to move left to right only, not up and down, right? Will be equal to mouse position dot X, right? You might be forgiven to think that. That's a good idea, right? You might say to yourself, well, let's see what I get when I do that really quickly, and then we'll end for the day, right? After I fix this problem. So we'll run it. Okay. Look where my mouse is, and look where my plane is. How come?
Yay.
Because,
Yay.
and it kind of offsets. The closer I get to my screen, it kind of gets closer to my mouse. And you might try some kind of offset, and that might work, right? But it's not correct. And the reason why it's happening is because my screen coordinates and my mouse, what it's pointing at, are looking at two different things. So how do I fix this? Well, I got to do a couple things to my controller first. What I need is a reference to the camera object, because my camera is setting up the scene as a particular ratio. We're looking at it from a pixel perfect perspective, right? So let's set up a public, right, camera object. We're going to make a reference to our camera. That's the first thing we need to do. We're going to call it camera, right? And down in here, where we do this, where we do our movement by mouse, this is a neat idea. We're going to keep some of this, right? But now we're going to do something different. We're going to say, instead of mouse position X, we're going to say this, right, dot camera, dot, look at this, screen, right, to world point, right? If I go screen to world point, I'm changing my screen to my game world, right? Screen to world point. And then as listening for some kind of reference, which of course we're going to pass in as mouse position. That's the mouse position. And I only need my X coordinate. That's good. This is good. So now my screen to world, is going to translate between global coordinate system to my local coordinate system in my screen. Otherwise, it won't work, right? Let's save this. I'm going to go back to this. We have one more change to make. We have to connect the reference, right? So here's my player script, right? And if you notice here, I have this in my controller script here. I have a reference to a camera object that I need to make. So I need to drag and drop my main camera into that piece there to make the connection. So my camera object now is linked to my player controller so that it knows where my mouse position is. Okay? So remember, my camera sets the rendering size. I'm mapping to the view of my camera, which is really cool, right? So that way, the size of my camera, where my camera is looking at, is where my mouse is going to be. It's going to be matching my mouse position to my camera's view. That's what I want, all right? And then I press play. Let's try this out now. Ah, that's much better. And now you can get a higher score too, because faster, right? So I don't have to worry about frames per second. It's nice and easy, right? And I have a much better controller with my mouse as opposed to my keys, right? So if you want to do that, right? See how I avoided the cloud. Let me get a higher score now. before I die.
Yay.
Still gonna die,
Yay.
right? But I might be able to break 1200. Let's see if I can do it.
Yay.
I did it. Oh, hold on.
Yay.
I did it. 1300.
Yay.
Oh man, I'm gonna die.
Yay.
Right?
Yay.
I'm getting better at my own game, right? And it's really hard. Right? Hold on.
Yay.
And you see how much better it is, right?
Yay.
So it makes sense that the clouds are more
Yay.
challenging now. 2000. Oh, 2,000 points. All right, so that's the next change. Let me revamp that. I'm going to save my scene. I'm going to save my project, and I'm going to go to git add dot and git commit -m changed player controller to mouse control. Mouse. Oh, I did that. Mouse control. So it's kind of a bigger commit. And then git push origin master, and you guys have it all. Questions? So we've done a couple things today before we end up for the day, just to wrap up. We've done our score. We've changed our font. We added a couple sounds that didn't work, right? Which we're going to fix in our next tutorial, right? We're going to do. We've actually added in change from mouse controller, or sorry, keyboard controller to mouse controller. So a lot of little things you can add into your game to enhance the look and feel and the playability, right? Oh, actually, also did a game end screen. I showed you how to enable and disable objects. That's kind of a neat thing as well. Any questions around this before we end for the day, right? Certainly send me an email. Remember that this weekend we won't be able to talk because I will be at our Varsity Hack. Just to remind people, you're still not too late to register. Varsity Hack's happening Saturday and Sunday, so I will be unavailable throughout the weekend, but I will be available on Monday. I'll see you guys Monday. So if you have any questions for your project, your assignment number 1, please bring to the class on Monday, and I hope we can make some time. Also, I have a little bit of time before on Friday if you need to meet with me, which is I hope to kind of get together with the people who are doing Varsity Hack, so we can talk about some plans for the next day. All right? And that's it for me, guys. Take care.